Good afternoon. We're continuing with the laws of Sefirah, and we're on Tuf Pei Tes Beis 489-2 in the Shulchan Aruch and the Mishnah Berurah. So today we're going to talk about what is the best time to count Sefirah. What is the proper time? What's the earliest time that you can count Sefirah? So it says the Shulchan Aruch, Im tel biyom hama'unan uberchu al Sefirah sa'omer chozron lispor kishetachshach. The Shulchan Aruch says if you count Sefirah, let's say it was a cloudy day. Back in the day, they didn't have watches, they didn't have clocks so much, so they had to see when the sun set, to see when it was the next day, when is it evening. So let's say you counted on a cloudy day, and then the clouds dispersed and you realize that it was still day when you counted. So the Shulchan Aruch says, the Mechaber writes, you have to count again when it gets dark. V'hamadaktikin, those that are careful in mitzvahs, einam soifrin atzeisu kachavim. They don't count until the stars come out. V'chein roi lasos, and that is the fitting procedure. That is one should do. So the Shulchan Aruch says that the proper time to count is tzeisu kachavim, when the stars come out. So if you remember, we have two times about when does the next day start. The Jewish day we know starts at night. There are two times when it could start. One option is when the sun sets, when the sun sinks below the horizon. And the other option is when the stars come out. That's called Tzeiso Kochavim. So this is a big debate. Very much has been written on it, starting already with the Talmud. And so what is the proper time to count? So the in-between time, so do we count at sunset or do we count at Tzeiso Kochavim when the stars come out? So the Shulchan Aruch says that one should preferably count when the stars come out, because then we for sure know that it's the next day. Because between sunset, the time of sunset, and the time when the stars come out, that's called Ben Hashmashos. We are really not exactly sure, is it yesterday or is it tomorrow? Did the new day start or not so much? So in order that you can avoid any type of uncertainty and count Sefirah when it's for sure nighttime, when it's for sure the next day, you should preferably count after Tzeiso Kochavim, after the stars come out. Now, that's about 42 minutes after sunset. So in Manalapan, that's going to be around, let me just check here. That'll be about 8:09, 8:10. So the proper time to count Sefirah in Manalapan tonight is around 8:09 and 8:10. And obviously that time changes every day. Now let's see the Mishnah Berurah and we'll learn a little bit why that is. Hume divrei harashba. This is from the words of the Rashba, B'tshuva Siman Kufna Dal, Mevor Sham Shakahal Hispalu Gam Marav Kodem. So let's say you daven Marav before it became night. Marav, the evening service, also has to be, you would think, prayed during the nighttime. But the Rashba says if you accidentally davened before, then you don't have to go back. Mishum tirchat tzibur, because it would be a very big deal, it would be a hardship on everyone to regather everyone for the minyan and to daven again. But for Sefirah, it's not a big deal. Again, our case was he counted Sefirah too early. So just to stand up and say, today is the 8th day of the Omer, today is the 9th day of the Omer, whatever it is, that's not such a big deal. So we make him do it again. How could you count and say that it's the 10th day of the Omer when it's only the 8th day? It's not true. You counted it when it was still the previous day, when it was still light outside. You just made a mistake because it was cloudy. That's what the Rashba writes. And he says you should go back and count after Shkia. First, the Shulchan Aruch says, and with a bracha. Now the Mishnah Berurah explains the preferred practice is to count after Tzei. So it sounds like from the Shulchan Aruch that technically one could count after sunset, because according to many opinions that is the next day, and we'll see why, other reasons also. But really, the best thing to do is to count after Tzeis, after the 3 stars come out. The Mishnah Berurah explains because really, technically, according to the letter of the law, you can count Sefirah after sunset, at the earlier time. What's the reason for that? We mentioned, why should you be able to count Sefirah according to the letter of the law after sunset if we said it's not clear if it's the next day or not? So the Mishnah Berurah explains that there's such a concept called Safek D'Rabbanan L'Kula. When we have a question in Jewish law, in general, there's obviously many details about this, but in general, if it's a Torah law, we're stringent. But if it's a rabbinic law, we are lenient. So, in our case, we're not sure if the time between sunset and when the stars come out, is that yesterday or today? Is it nighttime yet? So that's a question. And now let's look at the mitzvah of Sefirah. The mitzvah of Sefirah, according to most opinions, according to many opinions at least, is rabbinic. So here we have a question of a rabbinic mitzvah, and we're not sure if it's daytime or nighttime. So since it's a rabbinic mitzvah and we have a question, we're allowed to be lenient. So that's what this opinion holds. This opinion holds that since Sefirah, according to many, is a rabbinic mitzvah nowadays, and it's a case of uncertainty, so therefore, technically, according to the letter of the law, you can count Sefirah after sunset. However, he writes that it's not appropriate, even though technically it's a rabbinic mitzvah and it's a case of uncertainty. That's only when it happened already, maybe, right? Maybe the case is where you have, let's say you're cooking something and you have a question of a rabbinic food, if something's prohibited rabbinically, and it happened already, then you could be lenient. But here, you're putting yourself into a question of uncertainty. You're going ahead and counting at the time of Ben Hashmashos when we're not sure if it's nighttime or not. So why can't you just wait? It's very easy to just wait until the proper time and count then. So that's why the Shulchan Aruch concludes that even though technically you could fulfill the mitzvah after sunset, because we don't want to put ourselves in a place of uncertainty, even though this is a rabbinic mitzvah, and in the cases of rabbinic mitzvahs where you can be lenient, maybe that's only after the fact. And here we're putting ourselves initially into the situation in a case of uncertainty. So the Shulchan Aruch concludes and says the proper practice really is to wait until tzeis, wait until sunset, wait until 3 stars come out, so there's absolutely no question. V'chein roi lasos, rot salomer lechatchila, umikol makam b'diavad im birich im sipur, he says, ben hashmashos yatza. So he says, but however, b'diavad, if you did count in the time of ben hashmashos after sunset, you did fulfill the mitzvah. However, there are some that say, that Eli Rabbah writes, he's even more stringent when it comes to counting after sunset before 3 stars come out. What's the reason? We said that Sefirah, according to most opinions, is rabbinic nowadays, and that's why we can be lenient. But the Eli Rabbah points out, he points out that according to many poskim, according to many rabbis, the mitzvah of Sefirah nowadays is not rabbinic, but it's a Torah commandment. And since it's a Torah commandment, that means you can't even be lenient after the fact, even if you already counted Sefirah between sunset and Seis HaKochavim, since it's a question if it's day or night, since it's a Torah commandment, according to these rabbis, you didn't even fulfill your obligation. So the Eli Rabbah writes, if you counted Sefirah with a bracha between sunset and Seis, between sunset and 3 stars, you should go back and count again after 3 stars come out. So he's even more stringent. And if you look in the Bir Halacha, he has other reasons why a person should not count Sefirah before Seis HaKochavim, before 3 stars come out. So just to conclude, to summarize, we start with a question: when is the best time to count Sefirah? The answer is the best time to count Sefirah is after 3 stars come out, which is approximately 42 minutes after sunset. And in Manalapan, tonight, that's around 8:09 or 8:10. If you did count Sefirah before that time, you should go back and count. If you counted Sefirah after sunset, before 3 stars come out, then you should go back and say Sefirah again without a bracha. Now, what about the minyanim where they daven early and they count Sefirah because they're worried that people will forget and it's after sunset? So that, God willing, we'll talk about later in the week, what is the best procedure to do there. But for sure, if someone wants to fulfill the mitzvah in the proper way, the best time to count Sefirah is after 3 stars come out. Okay, we had a lot of details there. If anyone's interested to learn further about this or has any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out, email, Facebook, phone call, whatever's easier. Have a great day.